I'm Evelyn Brooks, 35 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been a ghost to my own family, the powerful Bennetts of New York. I changed my name, walked away, and built my reputation exposing the dirty secrets of people like them. But last month, an invitation arrived. My mother's charity gala, honoring me. They had no idea who I really was. I showed up anyway. The moment my brother Nathan finally recognized me across the ballroom, I knew. The real battle was about to begin, and trust me, they weren't ready for what I brought with me. Before I tell you exactly how I turned their perfect world upside down, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. If you've ever been the family disappointment, this might be the story you've been waiting to hear. You know, people always say they wish they could trade lives with someone from a perfect family. If you asked anyone in New York, they'd probably name mine. The Bennetts. We had it all, on paper. My father, Richard Bennett, is one of the most respected attorneys in the city. Senior partner and co-founder of Bennett & Collins, the kind of law firm that works quietly behind the scenes for people with way too much money and power. The kind of clients who don't lose. The kind of people who always stay on top. My mother, Margaret Bennett, runs the Heritage Foundation, a charity, technically, but in reality, it's a playground for politicians, investors, and high society types who like to sip wine, make speeches, and congratulate themselves for making the world better. Our family wasn't just wealthy, we were legacy, generations of success, generations of reputation to uphold. In the Bennett household, success wasn't encouraged, it was demanded. Failure wasn't an option, neither was being different. Then there's my brother Nathan, the golden boy, straight A's, Ivy League, clerked for a federal judge. Now practically being groomed to take over Dad's law firm someday. He always knew how to play the part, confident, sharp, charming when needed. Everyone looked at him and saw the future of the Bennett family. And me? I was the other one. I didn't care about networking at fancy galas. I didn't care about courtrooms or shareholders. I cared about stories, about truth, about asking uncomfortable questions. I wanted to write, to explore, to live life on my terms. But in my family, that wasn't seen as passion. It was seen as weakness, or worse, defiance. I remember those dinners. Dad talking about his latest legal victory, Mom dropping names of senators she had lunch with, Nathan chiming in with the perfect polished opinions, and me, just sitting there, invisible. Or when they did notice me, it was usually to remind me how I was falling short. I tried, though. God knows I tried. Good grades, right schools, smiling through events I hated, even applied to law programs to make them proud. But no matter what I did, I wasn't Nathan. And in their eyes, that meant I wasn't enough. At 20, I made the hardest decision of my life. I packed a single suitcase, walked out of that mansion, and never looked back. No money, no backup plan. Just a lot of stubbornness and the quiet promise I made to myself. If they won't see me for who I am, I'll make sure the world does. For a long time, I thought I'd erase them from my life completely. No calls, no visits, no connection. Just me, figuring things out on my own. But life has a way of circling back when you least expect it. If you've ever felt like you don't belong in your own family, like you're the outsider, the disappointment, trust me, you're not alone. I've been there. I've lived it. But stay with me. Because this story, it's only getting started. And if any part of this feels familiar, leave me a comment. Share your story. Or just know you're not the only one. We're stronger than they ever expected. No one really knew what happened to me after I left. Maybe they thought I ran off to Europe or married some artist. Maybe they thought I'd come crawling back when I ran out of money. Truth is, for a while, I didn't even know what would happen to me. I landed in Los Angeles with nothing but a suitcase, a few $100, and a lot of pride. And LA doesn't care about your pride. I waited tables in rundown diners, served coffee to people who looked right through me, shared tiny apartments with strangers. Some nights, I cried myself to sleep wondering if I made the biggest mistake of my life walking away from the Bennetts. But every morning, I got up and kept going. Because as much as I hated struggling, I hated the idea of crawling back to that house even more. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't some movie where everything magically works out. I worked 2 jobs, I took writing gigs, blog posts, product reviews, articles for websites no one read. But over time, I figured it out. I started writing stories that mattered to me. Real stories. About corruption. About powerful people getting away with things they shouldn't. I kept digging, kept asking questions no one else wanted to ask. Eventually, my work got noticed. I built a name for myself, but not as Evelyn Bennett. I didn't want that name. That name came with expectations, with history I wasn't ready to carry. So I became Evelyn Brooks, a new name, a clean start, a name no one in my family would ever recognize. I hustled, I wrote, I exposed corporate scandals, shady politicians, nonprofits that were nothing more than PR machines. I wasn't some tabloid reporter looking for gossip. I was digging for truth. Over the years, I wrote for big outlets. I published books. I was invited to speak on panels, on TV, in documentaries. Evelyn Brooks became one of the most respected investigative journalists in the country. People trusted me. People listened to me. But through it all, I never once talked about my family. Not a word about the Bennetts. Because as much as I wanted to forget them, a part of me still cared. Deep down, I hoped, maybe one day, they'd hear my name, see my face, and feel proud. Not because of the family name, not because I followed their path, but because of what I built on my own. For 15 years, I stayed away. No phone calls, no holidays, no polite small talk at fundraisers. I built a life, a reputation, a version of me they couldn't control. And for a while, that was enough. Until the day everything changed. But we'll get to that. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from scratch, if you've ever walked away from everything you knew, you know how hard that road is. But trust me, every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, it shapes you. You don't need permission to be who you are. You don't need their approval. Stay with me, because what happened next, even I didn't see coming. And hey, if you've ever felt like you had to fight twice as hard just to prove you belong, leave me a comment. I see you. You're not alone. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I still remember because I had just finished recording a podcast about corporate fraud in Silicon Valley. My phone buzzed with a new email notification. I almost ignored it, but the subject line made me pause. Heritage Foundation Annual Gala, honored guest invitation. For a second, I thought it was spam, maybe some automated PR blast, but then I opened it. It was real, formal, polished. Ms. Evelyn Brooks, the Heritage Foundation cordially invites you to our annual charity gala, recognizing leaders who have made significant contributions to society. It went on with the usual fancy wording: black tie event, VIP reception, attendance of distinguished guests. And there it was, my name, Evelyn Brooks, right at the top. I stared at the screen for a long minute. My first thought, it was a mistake. They couldn't possibly know. But the more I read it, the more it sank in. This wasn't about me being their daughter. They didn't know that part. This was about my work, about the name I built for myself over 15 years. The articles, the exposés, the books. In their world, I was a respected journalist, a convenient face to parade at their event. It was ironic, honestly. The foundation my mother ran, the same one I grew up watching from the sidelines, where I was never good enough to be part of their polished image, now sending me a personal invitation. Because I was useful, because my name, Evelyn Brooks, carried weight, and they had no idea they were inviting their own daughter. For the first few hours, I told myself to delete it, to laugh it off. I wasn't that person anymore. I didn't need their approval. But the thought kept creeping back. What would it feel like to walk into that ballroom, to stand there not as the disappointment they ignored, but as someone they had to acknowledge? I didn't sleep that night. I kept going back and forth. Part of me hated the idea of seeing them. Part of me wanted it. Closure, maybe, payback, maybe a little, but mostly, I wanted to know if 15 years had changed anything, if I had changed enough to finally face them. The next morning, I called my assistant, asked her to RSVP, book a flight to New York. She didn't ask questions. She probably thought it was just another networking event. I let her think that. Then came the dress. I knew exactly what I wanted. Not some designer gown dripping in diamonds like the women my mother surrounded herself with. No, I bought a sleek black dress, clean lines, professional, understated. I wasn't there to play by their rules. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there for me. I booked a hotel room across town. I didn't want to stay anywhere near the family mansion. That place? I wasn't ready for that yet. The night before the gala, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing conversations that probably wouldn't happen. What would I say if I ran into them? Would they even recognize me? Did I want them to? I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing. I couldn't back down now. I faced corporate CEOs, politicians, billionaires trying to bury the truth. I've stared them down, held my ground, exposed their lies. But this, walking back into my own family's world, it felt harder. It felt personal. But I had to go. I owed that much to the girl who packed her bags and left 15 years ago. I thought I was ready. I thought the hard part would be walking through those doors. I didn't know. That was just the beginning. If you've ever been tempted to face the people who wrote you off, to walk straight back into the room they thought you'd never belong in, trust me, I get it. It's complicated. It's terrifying. But sometimes, you have to. Stay with me. Because what happened next, even I wasn't prepared for. And hey, if you've ever had to prove to yourself, not to them, that you made it, leave me a comment. You're not alone in this. The first thing that hit me when I walked into the Plaza Ballroom was the smell. Polished wood, expensive perfume, a hint of champagne in the air. It all came rushing back like I never left. The giant crystal chandeliers hung above the crowd like they always did, sparkling with the kind of quiet arrogance this place was known for. The floors gleamed so perfectly you could see your own reflection, though no one here was looking down. Everyone's eyes were on each other, judging, calculating, performing. I stood by the entrance for a moment, watching them. Politicians, CEOs, lawyers, hedge fund managers. The so-called best of New York society. Men in tailored tuxedos, women in floor-length designer gowns, laughing in small clusters like they didn't have a care in the world. For a second, I almost turned around. But I didn't. Instead, I walked toward the registration table, heels clicking against the marble floor, steady, measured. A young woman in a black dress greeted me with a rehearsed smile. Name, please? Evelyn Brooks. She checked the list, nodded politely. You're on table 12, Miss Brooks, one of our honored guests tonight. Welcome. She handed me a sleek black program with gold lettering. My name was printed on the second page under Special Recognition Guests. I slipped it into my clutch and moved into the crowd. It was strange. I'd spent so many years building this version of myself. Evelyn Brooks, the journalist, the author, the woman who exposed the lies of the powerful. And here, in this room, I still felt like the outsider. I spotted familiar faces, news anchors, corporate leaders, even a few politicians I'd written about. Some people gave me polite nods, others avoided eye contact altogether, probably worried I'd dig up their secrets next. I kept moving, scanning the room for them. It didn't take long. Across the ballroom, near the stage, stood my parents. My father, Richard Bennett, tall, composed, in a sharp black tuxedo, holding a glass of whiskey like it was part of his arm. My mother, Margaret, perfect posture, flawless dress, talking animatedly with two donors I vaguely recognized from headlines. And next to them, Nathan. He looked older than I remembered. Sharper features, the same arrogant expression, the same carefully curated charm. He laughed at something, leaning in slightly toward my father like they were closing some invisible deal. For a brief second, I froze. I hadn't seen them in 15 years. Part of me expected, recognition, nostalgia. But standing there, they looked exactly the same. And I realized they hadn't changed. Maybe I had. I walked past them, close enough to brush shoulders, close enough to be noticed, but nothing. No flicker of recognition. My mother's eyes skimmed over me like I was just another guest. My father didn't even look my way. Nathan didn't flinch. It was almost impressive, the way they could erase someone so completely, even when that someone was their own blood. I made my way to table 12. The people there were polite, mostly older, wealthy donors, a few journalists I recognized from bylines, but never cared to network with. I smiled, made small talk, accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I could play the part. I'd learned how. Half an hour later, the speeches began. My mother took the stage, welcomed the crowd with practiced elegance, talked about the foundation's mission, their accomplishments, their future goals. I listened barely. I'd heard versions of the speech my whole life. What caught my attention was when she listed the night's special guests, names that carried weight. And right there, clear as day, she introduced me. We are also honored to welcome investigative journalist Evelyn Brooks, whose work continues to inspire accountability and transparency across industries. Applause followed. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. I just sat there, watching their faces. My mother glanced in my direction as the applause died down. Her eyes swept over me, politely, distantly, then moved on. Still nothing. It wasn't until the mingling started after the speeches that Nathan finally approached me. He had that same casual, confident walk I remembered from childhood. His eyes flicked down to my name badge. His smile barely reached his eyes. "So, you're Evelyn Brooks," he said, like it was a joke only he understood. "That's what they tell me," I answered evenly. He tilted his head slightly, studying me, the gears in his brain clearly turning. "Funny, you remind me of someone." "Do I?" I held his gaze. His expression shifted for a second. A flicker of suspicion, maybe realization, but he covered it quickly with a smirk. "Well, whoever you are, nice work. Not easy building a reputation out of nowhere. Some of us have to carry the family name. Others get to reinvent themselves completely." His voice was light, but the bitterness underneath wasn't subtle. I took a sip of my drink. Some of us didn't have much of a choice. Before he could respond, someone called his name from across the room. A business partner or political donor, no doubt. He gave me one last look, something between curiosity and resentment, then walked away. I stayed at my table, watching them, my family, work the room like professionals. They were good at it. Smiles, handshakes, quiet negotiations behind polite conversations. A perfectly staged performance. It hit me then. This wasn't a gala. It was a masquerade. Everyone here wore a mask. Some of them just never took it off. I thought coming here would bring closure, or power. But as I sat there, invisible to the people who shaped my childhood, I realized. They didn't need to recognize me for this night to matter. They would soon enough. I didn't know it yet. But the real show was just getting started. If you've ever stood in a room full of people who swore you'd never make it, you know the feeling, the quiet, heavy truth that maybe you don't need their approval after all. Stay with me, because the moment everything unraveled is coming. I was about to leave. I'd had enough of the champagne, the shallow conversations, the rehearsed laughs. Enough of watching my parents and Nathan work the room like seasoned politicians. I could play the part, sure, but being here, surrounded by these people, it reminded me too much of the girl I used to be. The one who tried so hard to belong, only to be invisible in plain sight. I picked up my clutch, smoothed down my dress, and turned toward the exit. That's when I noticed the man near the bar, deep in conversation with two younger executives. Sharp navy suit, silver hair, tall, confident posture. I recognized him immediately. Michael Grant, CEO of Grant Media, one of the most powerful media moguls in the country. His face had been on business magazine covers for years. I'd written about his empire more than once, carefully, thoroughly, critically. He was smart, ruthless, respected, and now, apparently, a close ally of my family's foundation. I didn't expect him to notice me, but he did. His eyes swept across the room and landed on me like it was intentional. Like he'd been looking for me all along. I froze for a second, mask in place, prepared for, I didn't even know what, but he smiled. Calm, collected, almost amused. Like he already knew the punchline to a private joke. He excused himself from the group and walked straight toward me. His handshake was firm, practiced, his gaze steady. "Evelyn Brooks," he said, like we were old acquaintances. I held his hand, kept my expression neutral. "Mr. Grant." "Michael," he corrected smoothly. "I've been hoping to meet you. Your work, impressive, sharp, fearless." His voice dropped slightly, conversational but controlled. "It's not every day someone in your position goes after the people they go after. I admire that." I gave a polite nod, reading between the lines. Men like him didn't hand out compliments unless they served a purpose. "Appreciate that," I replied. "Though I imagine not everyone at this event feels the same." His smile widened just slightly. "That's why I like you." Before I could answer, he glanced past me, toward the center of the room, where my parents were standing with a circle of major donors. My mother, picture perfect as always, held court effortlessly, dressed in deep green silk, diamonds sparkling at her ears. My father, all sharp lines and quiet authority, nursing a whiskey, nodding along to some business conversation. Nathan stood beside them, glass of champagne in hand, laughing, eyes darting across the room, always aware of who was watching. Michael followed my gaze and tilted his head thoughtfully. "Small world," he remarked. "I've known Richard and Margaret for years, and yet, somehow, I never knew they had such an accomplished daughter." His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it, the kind successful men like him always carried, the kind that suggested nothing they said was ever random. My stomach tightened, but my face stayed composed. "We haven't exactly advertised that part," I replied evenly. Michael chuckled under his breath, eyes still locked onto mine. "Their loss." He straightened his posture, his expression unreadable now. "I think tonight that's going to change." And before I could stop him, he was already moving toward them. I followed a few steps behind, pulse steady, face calm, but every muscle in my body alert. The crowd shifted around us. A few heads turned as Michael approached my parents, his presence naturally drawing attention. My father's eyes lit up in recognition as Michael reached him, hand extended. "Michael," my father greeted him, voice warm but controlled. "Glad you could make it." My mother turned, her smile flawless, her hand resting lightly on my father's arm. "We weren't sure your schedule would allow it this year," she added with polite charm. Michael exchanged greetings effortlessly, slipping into their world like he belonged there, which he did, but then his eyes flicked toward me. "I'm here for a lot of reasons tonight," he said casually. "One of them, standing right here." He stepped aside, gesturing to me. "Your daughter, quite the force in journalism. We were just talking." The words landed like a stone in still water. For a split second, nothing happened. My mother's smile froze. Her eyes met mine. Politely at first, like I was just another guest. And then, they changed. The recognition hit. Her pupils narrowed slightly. The corners of her mouth faltered. Her hand tightened on my father's arm. My father's expression barely shifted, but his eyes, they sharpened. Cold calculation flashing behind them as his gaze settled on me. He glanced at my name badge, Evelyn Brooks, and then back to my face. I saw it happen, the math in his head, the impossible connection snapping into place. 15 years gone, a new name, but some things can't be erased. My mother recovered first, her voice carefully steady, but strained beneath the surface. "Of course," she managed. "Evelyn has made quite a name for herself." My father didn't speak. His jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving mine, reading every line of my face, every detail, like trying to understand how I'd slipped through their grip for so long. Nathan approached, confused, sensing the shift in energy. His eyes bounced between me, my parents, Michael. His brow furrowed as the pieces slowly, painfully, fell into place. It was subtle, no shouting, no dramatic gestures. Just the quiet, heavy tension of a family unraveling in real time, right in the middle of a perfectly staged gala. Michael, either oblivious or intentionally twisting the knife, smiled. "It's refreshing, honestly," he said. "Building success without leaning on the Bennett name, that kind of independence, takes guts." My father's mouth pressed into a thin line. My mother forced a strained smile. Nathan looked like he'd just been punched in the gut. And I stood there, calm, still, watching them finally, truly, see me, not as the runaway, not as the disappointment, but as the woman they never thought I'd become. The applause in the room started again as another speaker took the stage. The music played on. But between us, everything had changed. For the first time in years, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I wasn't invisible. But what I didn't realize was that their silence wasn't shock. It was strategy. Because tonight, I thought I was holding the upper hand, but they weren't done yet. If you've ever waited for the moment they had to face who you became, you know it never goes the way you imagine. Stay with me, because what happened after this was uglier than I expected. The gala ended late. People lingered near the bar, finishing their drinks, still making empty promises to catch up soon. My parents disappeared into their usual circle of high-profile donors. Nathan was nowhere to be seen. I figured that was it. A dramatic, awkward encounter, followed by years of them pretending it never happened. Classic Bennett style. I was ready to leave, but of course, it wasn't over. The next morning I got a message. Simple, direct, from Nathan. Breakfast, 9 a.m., the garden at the peninsula. No question mark, no explanation, just an order. The same way he always talked to people he thought he had power over. I almost ignored it, but I didn't. Part of me wanted to see how far he was willing to go. Part of me wanted to look him in the eye as the woman I am now, not the scared kid he used to push aside. The peninsula was all marble and soft lighting, the kind of place where businessmen closed multi-million-dollar deals over omelets. Nathan was already there when I arrived, scrolling through his phone, a half-finished espresso on the table. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable, but there was something underneath. Tension, calculation, maybe a hint of panic, though he'd never admit it. "Evelyn," he greeted, leaning back in his chair. His voice was controlled, polite, the same voice he probably used in boardrooms. I sat down across from him without smiling. "Nathan." For a moment, we just stared at each other, two people from the same childhood, now strangers playing a different game. He broke the silence first, setting his phone aside, his eyes sharp now. "You made quite the entrance last night." I shrugged. "Didn't plan on it." He huffed a short laugh. "Yeah, sure." He paused, drumming his fingers lightly on the table. "Look, I'll skip the family drama. You're back. You've got a name now. People listen to you." He leaned in slightly. "I'm not here to argue about the past." I didn't respond. I wanted to see where this was going. Nathan watched me carefully, weighing his words like a lawyer crafting a closing argument. "Here's the thing," he continued. "Grant Media's expanding. They're looking at a major partnership with Bennett and Collins. If that deal goes through, it's going to reshape how corporate law and media interact in this city." I stayed quiet, letting him talk. "Your little couple moment with Michael Grant last night, impressive. You've clearly earned his respect." He smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. And that is useful, to all of us. There it was, the reason for this meeting. "You want me to, what? Use my influence?" I asked, voice steady. Nathan nodded, like it was obvious. "A few articles, some positive coverage, nothing crazy. You help smooth things over, make the deal look like a win for the public. In exchange..." He sat back, confident now. "I talked to Mom and Dad. We clean the slate. You get your place back. No more awkward introductions. You're a Bennett again, with all the perks that come with it." For a brief second, I almost laughed. The arrogance. The assumption that after everything, I'd trade my independence for their approval. Like their last name was still some priceless gift. I tilted my head, studying him. "You think I care about that?" His smile faltered slightly. "You care more than you admit," he replied. "Otherwise, you wouldn't have shown up last night." The honesty of it stung, but I didn't let it show. I leaned forward, voice calm, quiet, sharp enough to cut through the pretense. "I didn't come back for their approval, Nathan. I came back to see exactly how little has changed." His jaw tensed. I wasn't done. "I built this, my career, my reputation, without the Bennett name, without their help, and I sure as hell won't trade it for some backroom PR deal." His eyes hardened. The fake charm slipped. The real Nathan, the entitled, ruthless version, surfaced fast. "Careful," he warned, voice low now. "You may have built something, but it's fragile. I know how the media works. One well-placed rumor, one hit to your credibility." He let the sentence hang there, unfinished, but clear. I sat back, unshaken. "Threatening me won't fix your problems," I said. "And trust me, you have bigger ones coming." Nathan's smile returned, colder this time. "We'll see." He reached for his phone, signaling the conversation was over. "Enjoy the city while you're here." I stood up, not bothering to finish my coffee. As I walked away, I didn't look back. But I knew that meeting wasn't a reconciliation. It was a warning. And when people like Nathan get desperate, they get dangerous. If you've ever had someone try to pull you back into their world, with empty promises and quiet threats, you know exactly how this feels. Stay with me, because the games they play are about to get ugly. It started small. The kind of small you almost miss, until it isn't small anymore. A few weeks after that breakfast with Nathan, I noticed a shift. Subtle at first, emails from editors that used to come easily suddenly took longer to answer. An invitation to speak at a panel. Canceled last minute, no explanation. I brushed it off. The media world was fickle. It happened. But then the real cracks showed. A blog with decent traffic published a hit piece. Sloppy, anonymous sources, claims that I fabricated parts of my investigations. At first, I didn't care. I'd seen worse. But then another one, then another. Suddenly it wasn't just shady blogs. It was legitimate outlets. Quiet questions whispered behind closed doors. Former colleagues hesitating to reply to my messages. Some even unfollowed me publicly, like I'd caught some kind of professional disease. I wasn't stupid. I'd seen this pattern before. I'd reported on it. Smear campaigns, reputation management at its dirtiest. And the Bennett family, they didn't play fair, they never had. I dug into it the same way I dig into any story. The source of the articles, a so-called independent PR firm. I recognized the name. They'd done quiet work for politicians, corporations, and for Bennett and Collins. The message was clear. Nathan didn't take rejection well. And when I refused to play along, he went for the only thing he could touch, my name. The phone calls started soon after. Blocked numbers, no one speaking on the other end. Just silence. A reminder, they were watching, that they could reach me anytime, anywhere. Clients grew distant. A book deal I'd been finalizing paused. Suddenly, the publisher had concerns about timing. I wasn't surprised. Money talks, and the Bennett name still carried weight. At first, I was angry, furious, but that passed quickly. Because underneath the anger was something colder, familiar. I knew exactly how these people operated. I grew up watching them manipulate, control, destroy quietly behind mahogany doors and polished press statements. They wanted me to fold, to crawl back, to stay quiet, to need them. They didn't realize I'd been preparing for this my whole life. I spent nights combing through old files, emails, contacts. I reached out to sources, real ones, people I'd helped before. Quietly, methodically, I started tracing the threads. And what I found? It wasn't just about me. Nathan wasn't working alone. He had partnered with a rival media group, one with a long history of fighting for market share against Grant Media. They saw me as collateral damage, take me down, weaken Michael Grant's public allies, and Bennett and Collins tightened their grip on the upcoming deal. It wasn't personal to them, just business. But for Nathan, it was absolutely personal. He wanted me dependent or gone. The deeper I looked, the uglier it got. Leaked emails, fabricated documents, paid sources to discredit my work. A full-scale operation designed to do one thing, force me into silence or irrelevance. But here's the thing they never understood. I'd survived worse. I'd built everything they thought they could tear down, and I wasn't going anywhere. If you've ever had someone try to erase you, not with violence, but with quiet, calculated destruction, you know how dangerous that can be. But I learned a long time ago, power only works when you stay quiet. Stay with me. Because I wasn't planning to stay quiet anymore. And trust me, I know exactly how to hit back. If there's one thing I learned from my family, it's patience. The Bennetts never reacted publicly. They didn't throw punches, they pulled strings, quietly, efficiently. That's how they built their empire. That's how they buried their enemies. The difference was, I'd been paying attention all these years. So when the smear campaign started tightening around me, I didn't go on podcasts to defend myself. I didn't blast statements on social media. I did what I've always done best. I investigated. I started with the PR firm. On the surface, they looked clean, boutique, high-end. But behind the polished website and paid testimonials were contracts, confidential ones, linking them directly to Bennett and Collins. I traced payments funneled through dummy corporations, watched how their press releases lined up perfectly with the hit pieces coming after me. But I didn't stop there. I dug into Nathan's world. His emails, his recent travel records, financial disclosures buried deep in public filings. It wasn't hard to connect the dots once I knew where to look. A quiet dinner with a senior executive from Stanton Media, Grant Media's biggest competitor. 3 meetings logged at private clubs under shell company names. Wire transfers that conveniently aligned with sudden editorial attacks on me. Classic playbook. Old money, new manipulation. It wasn't just about discrediting me. It was a 2-for-1 deal. Destroy my reputation, weaken Michael Grant's circle of influence, and secure the Bennett and Collins partnership with Stanton Media. Nathan thought I'd panic. He thought I'd run scared or crawl back to the family. desperate for protection. Instead, I watched. I listened. I documented everything. I met with people quietly, journalists I trusted, a digital forensics expert I'd worked with on a previous investigation, even a former Stanton Media employee who hated how dirty they played. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. I got audio recordings, hushed conversations over drinks, Nathan promising discreet cooperation in exchange for Stanton Media's help burying me. I got copies of internal documents outlining the smear campaign strategy, with my name printed in bold as the target. I even managed to get my hands on a draft contract, a confidential agreement between Bennett and Collins and Stanton Media, set to be announced at a joint press conference in a few weeks. But I didn't rush to expose it. That was their mistake, acting fast, acting loud. I knew better. I let them get comfortable, let them believe their plan was working. Meanwhile, I built my case, quietly, carefully, bulletproof. I filed everything. I lined up my sources. I prepared my evidence, and I waited. The perfect opportunity was coming. A public event, cameras rolling, all eyes on the Bennett name, Grant Media, Stanton Media, the whole polished circus. They thought they were about to secure the biggest deal of their careers. They had no idea. I was about to set fire to the whole stage. If you've ever been backed into a corner, if you've ever had powerful people try to quietly erase you, you know the best revenge isn't noise, it's preparation. Stay with me. Because what came next, they never saw coming. The day of the press conference came faster than I expected. Bennett and Collins, Stanton Media, and Grant Media, three powerhouses standing on the edge of what they promised would be a historic partnership. It was all over the news. Headlines talked about industry reshaping, unprecedented cooperation, strengthening media integrity, the usual carefully crafted corporate language. What they didn't know was that I'd been preparing my own version of the announcement. The event was held at the Manhattan Grand Conference Center. Floor-to-ceiling windows, dozens of cameras, rows of carefully placed journalists, most of them hand-picked, pre-screened, the kind of press that knew better than to ask the wrong questions. But not all of them. Some real reporters slipped through, people I'd worked with before, people who, like me, were tired of how power worked in the city. I arrived early, quiet, no entourage, no media team, just me, my notes, and a flash drive in my pocket containing everything I'd spent the last few weeks gathering. Audio files, documents, contracts, timelines, evidence that could rip the facade off this carefully staged performance. I stayed in the back as the event started. Nathan took the stage first. Sharp suit, flawless smile, rehearsed confidence. He talked about legacy, innovation, family values. The crowd nodded along like they were hypnotized. Then came the Stanton Media CEO, painting the partnership as a win for transparency. The irony made me want to laugh. Finally, Michael Grant spoke. His words were calm but firm, positioning Grant Media as a protector of truth, reinforcing the idea that this deal would be good for the public. He didn't know yet what I was holding, but to his credit, he looked uneasy, like part of him sensed something was off beneath the surface. When the speeches ended, they opened the floor for questions. The first few were predictable: finance, market expansion, media ethics, all controlled, pre-approved. And then I stood up. The room shifted, cameras turned. Nathan's eyes locked onto mine. For a second I saw it. The flash of panic. He hadn't expected me here. He definitely hadn't expected what I was about to do. I introduced myself, not just as Evelyn Brooks, journalist, but as Evelyn Brooks, the person they tried to erase, the daughter they buried, the woman they underestimated. I didn't waste time. I pulled out the flash drive, held it up for the cameras to see, and calmly stated what I had. Proof of a coordinated smear campaign. Proof that Bennett and Collins, in cooperation with Stanton Media, attempted to discredit me, manipulate the press, and quietly influence public perception to secure this partnership. I listed dates, meetings, payments. I referenced recordings, real verifiable conversations between Nathan and Stanton Media executives. I mentioned the contract, the one they all swore was still under negotiation, but had been signed behind closed doors weeks ago. The room went still. For a moment, no one moved. Then the reporters erupted. Questions fired from every direction. Cameras zoomed in. Phones lit up. The PR team scrambled. Security exchanged nervous glances. Nathan's face turned to stone. His confident facade cracked. He opened his mouth, probably to deny, to spin, to deflect. But it was too late. The story was already out. I'd sent the evidence to 3 independent outlets before I even walked in the room. By the time he processed what was happening, headlines were breaking online. The mask was off. My father stood near the stage, jaw clenched so tight his temples pulsed. My mother, in the audience, stared at me like she couldn't decide whether to be furious or afraid. Michael Grant didn't speak, but he didn't stop me either. His expression was unreadable, but in his eyes, I saw a glint of quiet satisfaction. Not because he liked me, but because the game had just shifted in his favor, too. I didn't stay for the aftermath. I didn't need to. As I walked out of that conference center, past reporters shouting my name, I knew the damage was done. The truth wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, it was quiet, steady, and impossible to ignore. If you've ever been backed into a corner and found your way out, not by shouting, but by letting the facts speak for themselves, you know exactly how satisfying that moment feels. Stay with me. Because exposing the truth, that was only the beginning. The headlines didn't stop for days. Bennett and Collins tied to media manipulation scandal. Power struggles behind New York's elite partnership. My name was everywhere. The exposé spread faster than even I expected. Grant Media, naturally, distanced themselves immediately. They released carefully worded statements about disappointment and unforeseen ethical concerns. Stanton Media's stock took a hit within hours, but the real damage wasn't in the public numbers. It was inside the Bennett family, inside that carefully curated, polished image they'd spent decades building. 3 days after the press conference, I got the message. Short, direct, from my father. We need to talk. I didn't respond right away, but eventually, I agreed. Not for them, for me. We met at their townhouse, the same place I left 15 years ago. Nothing had changed. The manicured front steps, the heavy wooden door, the quiet hum of wealth and control pressing in from every direction. But stepping inside, I wasn't that scared, uncertain girl anymore. I walked in steady, prepared for whatever came next. My parents were waiting in the living room. Nathan sat on the edge of a leather chair, hands clasped, jaw tight. My mother stood near the window, arms crossed, watching me with a look I couldn't quite place. Anger, regret, maybe both. My father remained standing, perfectly composed, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Just the quiet ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Then my father broke the silence. You humiliated this family. His voice was low, steady, the same tone he used in courtrooms. You've destroyed years of work, of reputation. I met his eyes without flinching. No, I replied. You did that. I just refused to let you bury it. Nathan's face darkened. You could have handled this privately. You didn't have to make a spectacle. I turned to him, my voice flat. You tried to ruin my life. You came after my work, my name. You thought I'd crawl back. I paused. This was me standing up. My mother finally spoke, her voice quieter, strained. Evelyn, we only wanted what's best for you. You were angry. You ran off. Now you've brought this chaos back to all of us. I shook my head. No. You wanted control. You wanted me to fit into the version of this family you could parade at events like trophies. You never cared who I really was. The room fell silent again. For the first time, I saw it. The cracks in their facade, the exhaustion, the quiet, desperate scramble to hold together the image of success, of power, of a perfect family. Nathan leaned forward, frustration spilling through his words. Lord, do you even understand what you've done? This isn't just about some article. Clients are walking away. Investors are spooked. I've been suspended from the firm pending investigation. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. But then I remembered the smear campaigns, the phone calls, the way he smiled when he thought he had won. I didn't reply. Instead, my father stepped closer, his voice lowered, quieter now, but sharp. You've proven your point. Congratulations. You've made yourself seen. But understand this. You may have hurt us, but this family doesn't disappear that easily. I met his stare, steady. Neither do I. The conversation dragged on. There were accusations, half-hearted apologies, long overdue truths finally spoken, raw, jagged, too little too late. But beneath the anger, something else cracked open. For the first time, they weren't speaking at me. They were listening. Not perfectly, not easily. But for the first time, my words didn't bounce off polished walls and calculated indifference. Nathan, stripped of his certainty, finally admitted what I suspected for years. The pressure, the expectation, the jealousy he never outgrew. How being the golden child wasn't a gift, it was a cage. My mother, voice shaking, confessed how terrified she was of the family's reputation unraveling, because without it, she didn't know who she was anymore. Even my father, in his cold, measured way, admitted they failed me, not because I wasn't enough, but because they never tried to see me for who I really was. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. This wasn't some neat dramatic reconciliation, but it was honest. For the first time, it was real. If you've ever stood face to face with the people who broke you and realized they were just as cracked as you, you know how complicated healing really is. Stay with me, because families don't fix overnight. But sometimes, breaking is how the truth finally gets in. People love the idea of a clean ending, like once the truth comes out, the villains get exposed. The apologies happen, everything falls neatly back into place. But real life, it doesn't work like that. The night I walked out of my parents' townhouse, I knew there wouldn't be some perfect reunion. There wouldn't be hugs in the kitchen or family dinners where we suddenly laugh about the past. There was just space, uncomfortable, necessary space. And for the first time, I didn't fill it with anger. I let it sit there. In the weeks that followed, the scandal took care of itself. Stanton Media scrambled to salvage what was left of their public image. Their stock dropped, investors pulled out, and the deal with Bennett and Collins collapsed so fast, it barely made it through another news cycle. Grant Media, as expected, played it smooth. Michael Grant never publicly acknowledged what happened, but word got back to me through an anonymous email. Short, polite, strategic. You handled it well, you earned their attention. It wasn't gratitude, it was recognition from one player to another. As for the Bennetts, the damage control was subtle but obvious. My mother disappeared from public events for nearly a month. Heritage Foundation's social media pages went quiet. My father issued a carefully worded statement about internal restructuring at the firm. Behind closed doors, the whispers were worse than the headlines. Rumors about Nathan's suspension, about family disagreements, about cracks in the perfect Bennett legacy. I didn't reach out, I didn't need to. The damage was done, but more importantly, the shift had already happened. For the first time, they couldn't ignore me. Nathan texted me a week after the story broke. It wasn't an apology, not really, just 4 words. Starting therapy, thanks anyway. The old Nathan would have never admitted that. The version that tried to destroy my career would have sooner cut me out completely. But this version, bruised, exposed, unraveling, he didn't have the energy to pretend anymore. My mother emailed me links to articles, reports, even book reviews, little attempts at conversation disguised as recommendations. I didn't respond at first, but I read them. Some were useless. A few made me smile, just a little. The effort wasn't perfect, but it was real in its own awkward way. My father? He never reached out directly, but I heard from people at the firm, quietly, off the record. He pulled back from the spotlight, skipped a few high-profile events, spent more time behind closed doors than he ever had before. I knew him well enough to understand why. Control was his currency, and losing it, even briefly, rattled him. But even he learned to keep his distance. The strange part was, I didn't feel victorious. I wasn't walking around gloating or celebrating the downfall of my family's image. I felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't desperate to be seen by people who only ever measured me against impossible standards. I stayed in New York longer than I planned. At first, it was just practical, dealing with interviews, legal follow-ups, logistics. But eventually, I wanted to be here. I walked past the places that used to haunt me. The old townhouse, the private schools, the charity galas printed on glossy magazines. I visited the coffee shop where I worked nights as a teenager, where I dreamed of getting out. It was still there, still overpriced, still full of people pretending to be busier than they were. But I sat there for hours, unnoticed, just watching the city move around me. I even ran into a few people from my past. Old classmates, acquaintances. The kind of people who used to look at me with that polite pity reserved for the Bennett disappointment. But this time, the conversations were different. Short, careful, they knew now. They saw the headlines. They knew the name I built for myself. The one I didn't inherit, but earned. The thing is, the wounds never fully go away. I still flinched when I walked past the townhouse. I still hesitated when my mother's name popped up in my inbox. The scars stayed, quiet reminders of what it cost to stand up. But healing isn't about forgetting. It's about accepting the cracks, the jagged edges, the uncomfortable space between what we wanted and what we got. My family didn't magically become whole. Nathan was still Nathan. My parents were still layered in pride, control, fear of losing their perfect image. But for the first time, they stopped pretending I didn't exist. And for the first time, I stopped waiting for them to define me. If you've ever clawed your way back from being the outsider in your own family, if you've ever stood there, bruised but standing, knowing they still don't fully understand you, but realizing you don't need them to, you'll understand exactly where I'm standing now. Stay with me, because this isn't about revenge. It's about rebuilding, on my terms. It's strange how quiet life feels when the storm passes. No headlines screaming your name. No legal threats arriving in your inbox at 2 a.m. No whispers following you through crowded rooms. Just quiet. For years, I thought the quiet would terrify me. I thought if the noise stopped, if the fights, the resentment, the desperate need to prove myself all disappeared, what would be left? Who would I be without the war? But now I know. The quiet, it isn't empty. It's where the real work starts. The weeks after everything unraveled weren't glamorous. They weren't some victorious victory lap. They were awkward, messy, quiet. There were days I didn't leave my apartment. Days I stared at my phone, reading my mother's hesitant emails, wondering if I should reply. Days I drafted a response to Nathan and deleted it 10 times. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of the performative back and forth. Tired of carrying years of silence and resentment like bricks in my chest. But I also wasn't hiding. I took walks through the city, the same streets I used to run down as a teenager, desperate to escape that house, that name. I passed old bookstores, cafes, even the park where I used to sit for hours with a notebook, convincing myself one day I'd be free. And I realized I already was. Not because I exposed my family's secrets, not because I embarrassed them on a public stage, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't care if they approved. I didn't need their validation like oxygen. And when you stop needing their version of love, of acceptance, of success, it changes everything. Nathan's still figuring himself out. I hear about it through mutual contacts, therapy sessions, meetings with career advisors. His perfect trajectory? It shattered the moment I stopped playing along. And maybe that's what he needed. My parents? They're still them, controlling, polished, calculated. But quieter now, less sure. I haven't walked back into that house. I probably never will. Some places you leave behind permanently, but they've stopped pretending I don't exist. That's something. As for me, I've learned to sit in the discomfort, the not knowing, the half-finished conversations, the complicated love that doesn't always sound like love. I've learned that healing isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause or neat Hollywood moments. It creeps in when you least expect it, when you stand in the mirror and realize you're still standing, bruised, flawed, but whole in ways they never thought possible. And maybe you feel that too. Maybe you've been the outsider in your own home, the disappointment, the one they talked about in hushed voices, shaking their heads like you were some lost cause. Maybe you've spent years trying to prove you're worthy of love, of space, of being seen. And maybe you're tired of chasing their approval like it's some finish line you never reach. I've been there. So here's the truth they never wanted you to hear. You don't need them to validate your story. You don't need their recognition to be real. You don't need their version of success to be enough. What you build, brick by brick, scar by scar, on your own terms, that's yours. They can't erase that. They can't control it. And they definitely can't take it back. So if my story sounds like yours, if even a small part of this hit too close to home, know this, you're not alone. And you're not broken. You're not the version of yourself they convinced you was a failure. You're you. Flawed, complicated, still standing. And is more than enough. Thank you for listening, for staying through the mess, the silence, the small moments that felt too raw to say out loud. If my words meant anything to you, leave me a comment. Let me know. I read them. I see you. Even when the people who should have seen you first never did. And no matter where you come from, no matter what name they try to bear you under, remember this: your story is yours. And no one, not even the people who raised you, get the final word on who you become.